One of the most helpful mindset shifts you can make during insomnia recovery is how you're measuring success and progress. The tendency is to measure progress according to how much you're sleeping, or what level of anxiety you might be experiencing, or just generally how you're feeling. And on the surface, this seems to make some logical sense, since this is what we want, right? These are the kinds of changes that we're actually looking for. And so we tend to focus in on our sleep and how we're feeling every single day to try to figure out if we're moving in the right direction, if we're actually starting to experience progress. And even though this makes sense on some level, focusing on our sleep and on anxiety and how we're feeling on a day-to-day or even week-by-week basis can actually really start to hold us back as we're going through this. And so one of the biggest things I recommend to everybody that I work with is actually to take all the things that you really want in this process. Take sleep, take anxiety, take how you're feeling, all of it, and move it over in your mind to more of a long-term bucket. So move it over and know that it's coming. That's the thing. We're not moving it over to say it's not coming or to throw it out or anything like that. It's the opposite. We want to shift it over to a longer-term bucket in our mind and know that it's coming, but we don't want to use sleep and how we're feeling as our measure of progress in this short-term, day-to-day kind of way, because this whole recovery journey is up and down, right? It's bumpy. It has to be. And so if we're only really looking at our sleep and how we're feeling day to day, and we're going through these normal ups and downs that we all experience, then we're either going to think that we're succeeding, right? If we had a good night, if we're feeling a little bit better, we're thinking I'm on the right track. And then the moment we have a harder night, or maybe anxiety is really high the next day, whatever it might be, we think I'm failing. I did something wrong. I'm not in the right path, which isn't true, right? These ups and downs and all this variability is such a normal part of anybody's recovery process. And so if we start to see and track our sleep and how we're feeling as the main measure of progress, then we start to think that we're failing when we're not failing, when we're actually on the right track. And we can actually start to miss the real measure of success and progress along the way if we just stay so focused on this. So as much as you can, take sleep and how you're feeling and shift it over and just know that it's coming. But instead, start to look for shifts in your own perception of this experience and how you're responding to this experience as your main measures of progress as you're going through this day by day, week by week. So instead of looking at sleep, instead of looking at anxiety or symptoms or anything like that, really start to intentionally notice how you are starting to perceive the insomnia experience differently and how you're starting to respond to whatever is showing up differently. So let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this. Oftentimes at the very beginning when we're going through insomnia and anxiety, the whole experience is so uncomfortable that we feel as though it's a really dangerous experience. It feels dangerous, so we assume it is dangerous. So our main perception of insomnia can often be that it's really, really uncomfortable and it's very dangerous. And we want to start to shift our perception towards acknowledging that it's uncomfortable, but knowing that it's safe, which is a really big shift, right? So right now, your brain probably thinks this is uncomfortable and dangerous, and we want to start to shift that towards uncomfortable and safe. And that starts with our own conscious perception of this experience. And so that's part of it. So that's one example is our perception, the way that we are thinking about insomnia, beginning to change even a little bit based on what you're learning? And the other part of what I mentioned is looking for changes in how you're responding to this experience. And so that might look like responding differently to a symptom. Instead of adding more fear to a symptom, we might just allow it to be there, knowing that it's safe for it to be there, for example. Or instead of repressing a difficult emotion like fear or sadness, we might be practicing actually feeling our feelings through this experience. And that's also a really powerful change in response as well. And there's so many examples, so I just wanted to give a couple of examples, but focus on your perception and your response as the main measures of success as you're moving through your recovery journey. And that's where you're actually going to start to experience progress and success pretty much right away. And so it's a really, really big difference when you start to shift this, because all of a sudden you might have a difficult night when it comes to sleep, and maybe you had lots of symptoms show up, but you were practicing moving through this and responding in a new way. And so the next morning, instead of viewing that night as just horrible and dangerous and a failure, instead you would want to actually get up and acknowledge how difficult it may have been, but also view that as success, right? Success in the fact that you were practicing moving through that night in a new and helpful way. Whereas if we're only looking at the night or the day in terms of how much did I sleep, how am I feeling, right? How many symptoms are present? Then we would view a difficult night like that as just a failure. We did something wrong, when of course we didn't. And instead, having the ability to see a night like that as part of your progress, because it is, when you're practicing thinking about it differently and moving through and responding differently, it makes all the difference. Instead of feeling like a night like that is a huge failure and that you did something wrong and that you're moving backwards and things like that, instead you can actually start to see a night like that as part of your progress, as part of forward momentum. Because it is part of your forward momentum. We actually need the hard nights and the symptoms and all of it. We need the insomnia experience to be able to recover from insomnia. So it has to be part of our progress. And I will also often say, sleeping more consistently, feeling better, it's not even the goal, it's the byproduct. It's the byproduct of shifting our perception of this whole experience and of beginning to respond and move through it differently. Once we make these internal shifts, that's when we start to see sleep beginning to return, starting to feel better, not because we had to bring it back or make it happen, but because it's starting to come back on its own as a byproduct of all the internal shifts that you're making. So look for changes in perception and response, and use that as your main measure of progress as you're moving through this. And as you notice that, celebrate those moments with yourself. Every time you notice that you're starting to think a little bit differently about insomnia and the anxiety experience, every time you notice, you were able to respond a little bit differently, feel that as progress. Feel it. Celebrate it for a moment. I know that can be hard to do, but it can be helpful. And know that it's part of your forward momentum and that you're on the right track. All right, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time.